dirty old man.
Yeah, maybe
Oh,
you
I'll tell you
always
what, the
were.
dirty old man is true. No. You see, you couldn't technically be a dirty old man until you are an old man, and now I feel the same way. Like, who was I was talking to someone about like going after like 20-year-olds, and I'm like, dude, you are insane. What do you have in common with a 20-year-old? Nothing.
Wow.
Absolutely nothing.
You're absolutely right.
Not a thing. You know,
Okay. There was a
it's like
nurse
your
at work.
daughter. What are you gonna do? You're like sitting across from your daughter's friend or something.
Oh
Ugh, how
God, yeah.
creepy.
So there was
Ugh.
there's a nurse at work who specializes in middle-aged men. She's 24, and
Oh,
she's got a thing for middle-aged men. And so she
now
has been
see,
through. She's got a. And when I actually asked her, and I said,
So
"There was
why?
She goes, "Oh, because people at your age, they're a bit more. They're sensible. They're not stupid. They're settled. They've already got money. Do you know what I
that's
mean?
it right there, brother.
Money.
Yeah,
Bing, 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 bing.
No,
yeah,
it's money, but
exactly.
they also get treated well.
Yeah.
They're an older man's gonna bend over backwards for someone like
Oh
that.
yeah, exactly. If you get that kind of tail, yeah, it's not like you're going to turn around and
But
go
you see,
cheat
I
on
don't
that,
think
are
there's
you?
that. I don't think there's that stigma where like a younger woman goes after an older man. Like from I don't know. It's weird. I guess there's no stigma anymore about anything. But like, yeah, I don't know. Because I when I was young, I did like an older woman, and it was weird. You know.
Oh man, that reminds me. The best joke I've ever seen on television is from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Did either of you guys watch it?
No.
Parts I've never really watched
Now
religiously, but
recording.
Okay, so
Just
there's
so you
a
know.
so there's a guy on there, Charles, who's a bit of a dork. And anyway, they're having a discussion, the police officers, about the oldest perpetrator that they've arrested. And one of them's like, "Oh, had a 90-year-old." Another one's like, "Oh, had an 80-year-old, but I was afraid he was going to die in the back seat." And then Charles walks in and he goes, "Oldest bags? Yeah, 62." 62? Not very old. Yeah, no, but I was in high school at the time. What?
Well
You weren't
done.
even a police officer. And then the sudden realization, they realize what he's referring to. They're like, "Ugh, it's disgusting." And it's like, no, you get a chance to bet an older woman. And he's like, no, that's not an older woman. That's an old woman. That's someone's grandma. It's like, yeah, actually, that's how we met. She was Martin's grand. It's like, oh my
wow.
God. As I said, I've never laughed so hard at a sitcom as I did to that. Best joke ever.
I gross my two of my boys have gone through the teacher thing.
Oh, God.
Because apparently there's good-looking teachers nowadays. Whatever.
Yeah,
But,
yeah, they
mine
weren't
are.
around when we were. They weren't around our day.
Yeah, mine were not.
but they're all. That's another thing that lets you know how old you are, because I remember teachers being these old sort of people that were somehow separate from the human race, and
Yeah.
now I look at them and every single one of them's younger than me, and it is
Yeah,
what
but
it is.
everyone's younger than us. That's
Oh,
the problem is you get to that age where like unless so I go to a lot of like medical places, so of course I see older people just by virtue of being in that population. But like when I go to the grocery or even a lot of the doctors that I see now are well younger than I am, and it's just like okay.
Oh yeah, so I had this when we went to we were checking schools out for my eldest, who's now 20. So I mean, it was a while ago. And
Bring
I
that mic
swear
closer to you, Majid, if you can.
yeah, I swear we were going in, and they had all other students, kind of showing the place around. This is our arts room, this is our sports hall, stuff like that. And there was one that was showing us around as well, until we realized that he wasn't one of the students, he was one of the teachers. And me and my wife just looked at each other and went, "Oh my God, has it got to that stage now of
It
age?"
has.
Oh God,
Yep.
I know. It's just all
It
so
has.
depressing.
And I actually love that. It's kind of funny because you get that sort of, younger nurses kind of start treating you like an older gentleman. I mean, you know what I mean? And like in a way, it's kind of demeaning because you're just like, come on, I'm not that old. But then on the other hand, it's like, yeah, I'm 30 years older than you are, or
Yeah.
25 years older than you are. Like,
Well,
yeah.
at least you're not an ethnic minority. because I was admitted to hospital, the hospital where I used to work at, by the way, right? And the resident came round and went, "Speak English." And I went,
Why do they always do
"Yes."
that? Why do they always get louder when they think?
Oh no, because that's the English thing, isn't it? I mean,
It
okay,
is.
it's obviously true in America as well. But the joke here is that if you want to say something in a different language, you just say it slowly and loudly
Yeah,
with an
that's right.
accent.
What the hell is that?
We
I
do it
don't-
here too.
Yeah, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, like if we slow it down, that's going to make any difference. Okay. I hope you guys got something to talk about because I got next to nothing.
Well, we already started, didn't we? You should do your Linux OTC ASAP. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Well,
Because
I mean,
we've got so much content.
it's the brilliant thing now is that we start the stream, so it's all the stuff that we normally miss. At least it's out on YouTube. So
Yeah, because
Right.
I've already got a title now. Dirty old Linux nerds.
hey, I'm gonna have to write that down. Dirty.
Yeah. So how are you, gentlemen?
Well,
Joe's
hold on.
not here, so
Let's
I can
get
use that
let's get started.
He has to
here.
start.
I'm gonna do a 3, 2, 1, and then get me some seconds here. 3, 2, 1. Can either of you hear my little heater that's blowing right here?
Nope.
Okay, good.
I have so much background noise. I mean, it doesn't come through the mic, thankfully, but I've got my air machine now and an air filter and all this other stuff. So yeah,
Oh.
I can't hear a thing.
I was trying to. I mean, I got this radiant heater behind me going, but I mean, it gets a little chilly down here, and it's 19 degrees out right now. So,
Yeah.
I noticed something on these Discord channels I didn't realize before. If you go into the settings, you can actually crank up the bit rate for the audio, because it was set for 64 bits per
Get
second,
out of here. Well,
or
you
64
know what though?
kilobits.
If you're gaming, that's probably way good enough. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
So I turned that up to 90 something, and we'll see. So far, it doesn't look like it's hurting anybody, but we'll see how it goes. I think I can turn it down midstream if I needed to, or anybody,
Gotcha.
either of you can. Linux OTC, welcome to episode 42. I'm Bill.
I'm Eric.
And I'm Majid.
Yeah. No Leo again. We miss him. We always do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, I had some family problems,
Uh,
issues, and my thoughts and prayers out to him.
Yeah.
Dealing with loss isn't great,
Yeah, that as well.
especially at this time of year.
So, yeah, it's one of those times of year where everything hurts so much more because we're just trying to get through.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I once had a resident, and I actually he'd left our hospital, but I actually contacted him around Christmas time, and I said, I know that your mother passed away, and I know it caused you problems when you were here. This will be your first Christmas. I hope you're okay. It's amazing how much people will respond to just a little kindness, you know?
It makes a difference.
Yeah,
It really does. Yeah.
He really appreciated it. And then sometime later, when I needed to get some feedback, as you do your annual reviews and stuff like that, I mean, the kind of feedback that he gave me, it really made me realize that it is worthwhile teaching these juniors. Do you know what I mean? You do get to affect and help people. I mean, I suppose I'm in a helping profession anyway, but I mean, more than the usual, if you know what I mean.
And it's every little bit, every little thing counts. Because, I mean, I'm not teaching people to save other people's lives, but I do teach people how to do trucking. And I've noticed that and when you're doing a job where there's some fear and anxiety involved, if you are able to somehow share some words that might add a little comfort or strength. Every little bit helps, and man, they don't forget. They come back years later and tell you that thing that you said to them, really made a difference. And yeah, a little kindness, and I don't think it's because there's not so much kindness in the world. I think that we hold in so much of what we've got going on that we don't always give people the opportunity to be kind. I hope that's what it is, and it's not that we turned into a world of shit and everybody's evil to each other. I feel like it's...
No, I think everybody's busy. Everybody's running around and got a million things going on, and you got to slow down. And the other thing is we don't engage as much where we're thinking of other people. We tend to be more insular and focused on our own things, and looking at our phones and checking the things that matter to us. And yeah, when something's not in your face, even in your own house, let alone the people around you outside of that. So
it's interesting.
I agree. I don't. Good.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because I was thinking about that. I was telling the guys off recording that I took one of my two younger boys to his first proper experience at a barber shop today, and the last time I had been to a barber shop was before the phones became prolific, and the barber shop was always sort of the place where the men got together and looked at Field and Stream magazine and talked manly stuff. And there was still that, but there was men in there from every, age group, demographic, what have you. And they all, if they weren't talking, then they had their faces buried in their phones. So you're right. It is, people are, I don't know about
it's the de facto thing you do now. Like, you have to fill every second with something, right? And I've fallen prey to it. Like, if I'm not listening to a podcast, well, okay, so if I'm just like, in the kitchen putting together a sandwich, like making food or something, like I can't just do that. I have to have a podcast on as well. Or I can't drive a car and not listen to a radio, and some of that is, I'm not saying radio is a new thing, but like, I have this backlog of podcasts where I feel like if I don't listen to them, they get away from me. So it's almost like it's a task that I have to undertake and complete. And
I know what you mean.
But I mean, there's so many things that are drawing for your attention all the time, and I just feel like idle time doesn't exist, and you default to, I have to be looking at my phone because there's something drawing my attention.
Yeah, no. So I mean, I've noticed that as well, and I've noticed that especially with my kids, actually, that they're not used to being bored. When I were a lad, here we go on about me being old man again. But if you got, there's only so many things you could do, and so you found other things. You started reading books. You, I don't know, got into a sport. You go out for a run. You, whatever it was, you'd get into sport. Even if you watched television, there was only, and when I was a kid anyway, there's only 4 or 5 channels anyway, so there's only certain things you could watch. And and like nowadays, it just seems that kids just don't know what to do when they're not being constantly stimulated.
Well,
and
I think,
I noticed this especially whenever there's a Wi-Fi problem. That whenever there's a problem with our Wi-Fi in the house, suddenly it's almost like they don't know what to do. I mean, I made the joke when we first moved from the Northeast down to the Midlands that and there was a couple of days where we didn't have Wi-Fi. I mean, we all had our phones and stuff, but the kids were a bit younger then, so they didn't have their own devices. And it was almost like they didn't know what to do. It was like, well, what do I do? What do you mean, what do you do? There's nothing to do. It's like, yes, there is. Read. Walk.
Yeah.
There's stuff.
Build a fort. I don't know.
But at the same time, I'm probably as guilty of it as anyone else, and I've been in that situation where, for example, you see, you're stood in a queue for something, and then instead of just standing in the queue or sitting in the waiting room, you get your phone out and you do stuff. And you're right, you now find you always have to have some kind of background noise on all the time, even if you're not necessarily listening to it properly. And with podcasts is a good example. I mean, I nearly always seem to have a podcast going. My wife gets a bit annoyed when I put music on in the house because I normally put it on too loud, and she's not a great fan of heavy metal, unfortunately. So normally it's like, podcasts and stuff like that, or I've got my headphones in. And there was a guy I remember when it was another medic who. It was a long story, but we ended up staying together for a couple of days. We were staying in the same place for a conference or whatever. We'd not met before, but anyway, we were the only single guys, I suppose, there. And anyway, we'd chat and with this, that, and the other. And every time I'd see him, he'd have his headphones on. Every time, and I'll be like, dude, what are you actually listening to? Oh, I'm listening to an audiobook. Really? And then 10 minutes later, when we're sat down eating something, he'd take his headphones off, and then the minute he'd finish, he'd get back up, put his headphones on, and keep going. And it's like, okay, I mean, that's fine. And as I said, I'm as guilty of it as anyone else, but it does make me wonder sometimes. And I understand why you get phones which have this kind of Zen mode kind of setting of, switch your phone off, no notifications, half an hour,
Yeah.
And just, talk or watch or read or something where you're not being constantly stimulated. And there is a thing apparently about dopamine levels, isn't it? Because a lot of these things hit the dopamine centers in your brain and give you the reward centers in a way that drugs and alcohol do as well. And you get desensitized to it, and so you need further and further, you need more and more, basically, stimulation to keep yourself interested.
Strangely enough, I suffer a little bit of anxiety. Not so much at home, but when I'm at work and I'm driving, I suffer a little anxiety about falling behind in podcasts. So I feel like that it's true. You have to have something playing. I can't remember the last time I just quietly drove down the road and didn't have anything going on. Usually that's only on a Friday when I've caught up completely on all the shows. And then I feel weird. Like,
Right.
I'm checking, am I sure?
I know that too, where I'm like, yeah, right. Am I done? Am I done? Yep.
And
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's funny. We're fighting against the profession, the business of attention. And the business is such that the devices that we've all been, handed, largely they're designed specifically to do that, to grab our attention, and not just in sort of like a shiny object sort of way, like an insidious way, and not just for a certain class of people or age group or anything. It is everyone. It is human psychology that we are drawn to these little devices, and that is the absolute truth, because the same waiting rooms that I was in 5 years ago, or even a little longer, people would talk to each other. And again, these might have been slightly older people because it's the medical, facilities and things, but people were more apt to just sit and talk or look around. But now, everyone, and it is weird to me to see an 85-year-old person sitting on their iPhone looking through whatever the hell they're looking at. I'm like, what are you doing?
And this is, I make this joke all the time to my mom and to my father-in-law and stuff like that, that you all complain about young people, they're always on their phones.
Yeah.
Okay, they don't actually talk
it's
like that,
everyone.
but the amount of times I walk in to find that my mom is on her phone, right?
Yep.
Or when I was
it's-
when I was in India seeing my father-in-law, and this thing about things that get forwarded, right? All my mom and my father-in-law seem to do is just forward rubbish on WhatsApp. And it's like, oh, look, it's going to be a super movie. It's like, no, mom, this is just a rubbish. Why are you sending? Well, it might be true now. It's like, no, but what?
Oh,
doesn't matter
the
what it
older
is,
people are
it's
the worst about that. Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think it might be the dopamine. I think there's something absolutely, and I don't know what it is. I haven't really, studied it myself, but the idea that there has to be some physiological, psychological, some reason why it's insidious. All of us are drawn to it, right? And that just speaks to, and again, this isn't like an accident. This is done quite definitely on purpose.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
I just learned
it's business, isn't it? I mean, shark horror, multi-million-pound companies want to make money. They're going to
Right.
invest and figure out how best to, commoditize their product. And if you've got all these eyeballs staring at the screen, you're more likely to do, I don't know, use
And
their services, give them data for ads, buy stuff,
I feel
whatever it
like
might be.
science fiction
Absolutely.
writers saw this coming a long time ago.
100%,
And
right?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if
but
you were to
it's
describe to us as children, right, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever, that this was going to be the future, that everybody had a device on them that had a GPS, like satellite tracking system, that we could get in touch with each other 24/7. The idea that when you left your home, like you were always under surveillance, whether it was from your
that would have been
family or from
terrifying.
like you would have thought there is no way in hell that is
We are
going to
not going
come
to
to
let
pass
that
because
happen.
nobody's going to let that happen, right? No
Yeah.
one's going to give away that much privacy, and here we are. It's a great
mean,
experiment, right? And no one
yeah,
knows what it's doing.
how it's going to go.
Like,
Yeah,
I think about my daughter and the fact that her young mind, and we do keep her away from the worst of the social medias and stuff like that, but she's still on this device and still getting that dopamine hit and still experiencing the same thing. And there's a sense of loss I have a little bit where I want to spend time with her, and her greatest interest, the thing she wants to do more than anything, is be on that goddamn phone.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I know. I've had that issue when I'm trying to spend some time with my daughter as well. There's two things that came to mind actually, just from what we've been discussing. One is that not only podcasts and things, but television has become a work now as well. It's like
Yeah.
I
Oh,
have to watch this, and you start watching it, and then you're like, okay, well, I've seen this episode, and I need to see the next one, and then this one is a setup to this one, and all that sort of thing. And so again, that's a bit strange, isn't it? Something that you're supposed to be doing for your leisure has now become like, it's a job of things I need to do.
and the
second
realization
thing,
that, sorry, go ahead. Yep.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just
My
going to say
second
the
point was slightly
realization
different.
that there's more than you could ever possibly see. So even if you make a list of things that are like, oh, that looks really interesting, and I'd like to see that, the end of the day, you're like, I can't watch all this.
You could make a
When am I gonna
career
do
out
it?
of watching all these things and still not have
Yeah.
enough time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. no,
Second
very
thing.
true.
Go ahead. Second
Yeah.
thing.
The second thing I was going to mention is that so yesterday I was doing I was doing some robotic cases. So this is when there's a robot that's docked. It's inside the patient, and it's being controlled by a man at a console. So it's not like literally a robot is autonomously doing something. It's it is still being driven, as it were, by a human being. And unfortunately, one of the patients that we had was relatively young and had not had children, yet here she was having to have this major operation, which would probably destroy her fertility forever, unfortunately. And so there was this, and he said, and I said, she's quite young, isn't she? And he's like, yeah. The surgeon is like, yes, I know, it's quite complicated. I mean, she's not had children, and this is obviously going to affect. And what do we do? So we did like offer her, kind of egg freezing and stuff like this prior to the procedure. And then he said to me, you're a religious man. What does religion say about all this kind of stuff? And I went, look, medical things have advanced so quickly that nobody can even keep up, just from a cultural perspective, just from a lifetime thing. Getting religion to stay abreast of everything that's happening is just amazing. If you had told anybody that 60, 70 years ago, if you'd said, you could have your own child in the womb of someone else's, surrogacy, with
Yeah.
donor eggs and IVF and all this kind of stuff, they would have looked at you as if you're some kind of madman, or and yet here we are.
The idea of it would be so grotesque that someone would be like, "Oh my God, why would you ever do that?" But the social norm now of like understanding how that gives a woman a chance to have a child that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to have, and it's the compassionate side that overtakes the
Yeah.
medical or the potential like squeamish factor.
Yeah, but my point to him was that, look, if it's so mind bending just from a normal thinking point of view, what hope has religion got, to try and figure out how to deal with these complex questions and what's moral and what's ethical. Technology has gone so quickly And
Yeah.
it takes a long time for in the intellectual faculties, if you want to put it that way, to catch up. It's that Jeff Goldblum line in Jurassic Park, isn't it? You were so obsessed to see if you could that you didn't wait to think whether you should.
Good or not. Yeah.
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 And
But I
so
sit here and
it's the same thing with technology as well. As you said, 20, 30 years ago, okay, maybe a bit longer, 40, 50 years ago, if you had told people, yeah, you'd have a GPS tracker on your hand, and then, there'll be all this data mining that's done and all this stuff, people would have said, what kind of crazy man are you? That's not going to happen. How would it even happen? How would we even survive that? How would we even let that happen? Yeah, here
yeah.
we are.
Yep. And we do it willingly. And some of us care about privacy more than others, and we try our best. But the reality is that we live in a world where data brokers are a thing, and
Mm,
they're allowed to collect our data and sell it to the highest bidder, whether that person is up to no good or not. You know, and we have to prove. My wife's in this situation right now where some buddy opened an account and a business account for her business, right? And so business and personal are treated quite differently. Personal, there's a lot of protections in place. There's a lot of ways to, stop your credit, lock your credit and all, freeze everything. Business is a lot more different than that. It's handled more differently. So anyway, somebody opened an account in her name, not even in this state, and and they were doing this money mule behavior where they would someone would Venmo in $20 or $50, and it was from a bunch of different people, and that's money mule behavior from like romance scams and catfish and stuff like that, and that money then gets funneled to these junk accounts basically, and then gets sent overseas to wherever the scammer is. And so the onus is on her to prove that it wasn't her.
mm,
And like, it's like, wait a minute. Your onboarding process was such that you allowed someone to take data who wasn't in person, who didn't give you like an exhaustive amount of data, just these key elements of data that you ask for, and remotely or electronically were able to open an account and then start using that account immediately without any kind of oversight or wait period or anything. And now she's on the hook for that.
mm.
It's the burden of proof is hers. She has to file police reports. She has to, do all of these things to prove. I mean, none of the transactions were in this state. None of the, none of it
Yeah.
makes any sense, right? None of it makes any sense. And it's like, she is so stressed out by it, needing to. I mean, she spent hours this week working on this, and she just came in here and was just frazzled. And I'm like, this is so stupid. I cannot believe this is the world we live in. Like, and that's just it. Like, data and privacy and all of these things happen, and almost nobody thinks about it. And it's happening. We could spend our lives trying to make sure that none of our data leaks out. But if you have a bank account, if you do business with any company that has a web presence, if you do business with a company that stores data that can then be hacked and that data can be stolen, there's nothing you can do. And so the GPS tracking is one thing, but the idea that it's this like funnel that's siphoning all of this data on us, and behavioral data and location data, and when do you sleep, what websites do you look out there? You just think about the amount of information that one device has on you. And it also affects things like law enforcement. Like, what did the police do? The first thing they do, if there's some kind of like question about an investigation or something, get someone's cell phone, because that is the single greatest point of like everything that person does. Who did they
Yeah.
talk to? What did they go? I mean, it's just amazing to me that we have given over to cell phones or smartphones without even like really, really thinking about. Yes, there's a convenience, and yes, you can say decry the safety of it, and absolutely, I feel that way. The fact that I know that if my wife needs help or if I need help or whatever, like I can just call someone. But man, what a trade-off,
Yeah.
And talk
And
about like,
it
go
makes
ahead.
me wonder. It makes me wonder if when we do all this kind of security and privacy stuff, whether we are just kind of just pissing in the wind, and whether it makes a blind bit of difference in reality, you know, in the bigger picture, in the bigger scheme of things. Because for every uh for every tech weirdo like me that's, using, say, free and open source or using Proton or whatever, you've got someone like my wife who accidentally, I think I told you this a couple of months ago, her Amazon account had been taken over by a Russian bot, and she hadn't even realized for like 6 months. And I was like, oh my God. And we had to then check all the transactions and stuff like that. Or, for example, that my daughter had a YouTube channel based on my wife's email. And again, it was just so, I mean, I'm not having to go at my wife, but I'm just trying to say that for people who aren't as technologically literate,
Yeah.
for whom their smartphone is an appliance and they do certain things with it, it's like, it's really, really difficult. And so you then start wondering, is there, how far do I take it? What's the point me being tinfoil hat if even in my own circle and sphere of influence, a lot of that data could well be getting mined anyway. I suppose education is the thing. I suppose, people telling people to be good data stewards, understanding what they're doing, what they're not doing. And this is where I see when people prefer platforms like, say, Apple or Google Pixel, because there seems to be at least some inbuilt privacy security mechanisms that have been put in by the manufacturer, where they're good, where they're not good, or whether they're still backdoors. That's a separate point entirely. But sometimes I wonder whether maybe that is just the easiest way to keep some people safe. You can have the weirdos like me who might run graphene on their Pixel. I mean, I don't, but who might at least I know how to do it. Yeah, and run Mint on this, and I'm, I don't know if everybody can see, but I'm kind of struggling with my laptop in the corner, which is trying to install Elementary at the minute. And
You're trying the new version?
yeah, and
I was hoping you had that done by now. I was going to ask you about it.
yeah, no, I haven't got around to it. Well,
Yeah.
the thing, okay, well, let me just finish my point, then I'll go on to the rant about Elementary.
Oh.
So, and sometimes whether that is just the, how do we do that education, and how do we keep people safe online? And it's difficult, and maybe we do just need to outsource it to a company which might still be taking us for a ride, but at least might be keeping people safe. At least
I think we ought to be.
I don't know.
I think there is some logic in what you're saying, but I think we have to use a little caution, because if we leave it completely up to companies to handle our security, it's always going to be with the solutions that are beneficial to them more than they are to the people that are using it. It's always going to be solutions that are opaque in the way that they work. You really don't have a marvelous understanding of what you're being protected from anymore, because people have stopped trying to understand it and put all of their faith into some company, But
Yeah, and there seems to be I think part of the reason, I mean, maybe this is just me being a little bit rose tinted glasses, but I think part of the reason why so many of these scams and things have become so prolific is because so many people are doing them. And why are so many people doing them? Because it's relatively easy, and it's people think it's a victimless crime. So, I mean, to give the example, if, for example, you have a credit card, and the credit card details get stolen, and somebody does all these fake transactions and buys all sorts of shit, right? Then, the person that's affected contacts their bank, contacts their credit provider. They will put a stop on the card. They will reimburse the person that the money has gone from, reissue a new card. And the criminal in this situation has managed to get something for free. Yeah. And the person that he's robbed, because basically that's what they've done, they've stolen, right? He's getting reimbursed. So, well, it's all right then, innit? No big deal, innit? And I don't know, maybe I'm giving people a bit more moral fortitude than they have, and they just don't give a shit. But I just wonder whether that kind of, the way that you can kind of rationalize it to yourself that, well, nobody's actually being harmed, is it? It's just some big company that's, losing out on a couple of £100. So why not?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to deal with that because I mean, of course, there's the obvious answer to that as well. These companies are going to recoup their losses one way or the other. And that's the reason why we pay more for things is because companies need to they literally have to factor in loss into their structure, their spending and profit structure. And I don't know how easily that kind of wisdom is conveyed to people who want to see it as a victimless crime just to justify that, well, I'm not really hurting anybody except for these companies. Well, yeah, you kind of are hurting folks because these companies are going to pass on that loss one way or the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're not going to just say, "Oh, well, we're going to write that off or something." No, they're going to raise their prices.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
all
exactly.
that.
And that's where the money goes. Oh, yeah. So the rant about elementary.
Right on.
Okay. So whenever I've used elementary, the thing that I find is that it doesn't, as Moss would say on Distro Hopper's Digest, doesn't play nice with others. At least that's been my experience. I've always had issues when I've tried to dual boot it, some way or the other, and so I then ended up, if I did use it, I'd use it on a system which I wasn't going to be dual booting. So, for example, this podcasting rig here is, it just runs Mint at the minute, for example. But at the same time, one of the big attractions for elementary is things like touchpad gestures and things such as the fluidity of animations and all this kind of stuff. And so I really kind of want to use it on my laptops. But I don't want to destroy the Windows partition on those. I did have a test laptop as it was, a tablet like I was mentioning, I think last week on Mintcast, but I managed to sell. So now I don't have a test laptop anymore. And yeah, I mean, I just kind of think, it doesn't make it easy to do a dual boot. It doesn't, it never gives you the option of boot alongside like Mint does or Ubuntu does. You have to then, do a bit of partitioning yourself and and in my case, I always get this wrong, where do I put the root partition? Where do I put the boot partition? Where's the EFI and all this kind of stuff. I know, I'm 100% sure I've got that wrong already, actually, looking at the machine now.
Well, you don't really need to. So, like I was saying in that video with dual booting elementary OS, you really don't need to do anything. You can forget about the concept of a boot partition, as it were, and really just tell the installer for elementary or any Linux distribution that this, and it's always like a 500, it might even be a 100 megabyte FAT32 partition. Just tell the installer that is the EFI system partition, and then this unpartitioned space that you created in Windows is your root partition. And tell it to go ahead and partition that. Don't reformat the EFI
the
system partition.
Yeah.
It'll just put /boot into the root partition, but then it'll mount the EFI system partition into /boot /EFI. Does that make sense so far?
Well, and go ahead.
Yeah, and then you, like I said, you tell it to go ahead and format the root partition, and then it won't mess up your Windows at all. But like I've said before, you need to let Windows shrink the partition space and just create the unallocated space before you go and do any. And then you're always going to be better off doing the partitioning yourself. And I've even had cases where I would create the unpartitioned space, and then I would just use the Mint thing where it says install alongside Windows.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't use the unpartitioned space. It would create
Yeah,
some other
it would
space or
create it.
something.
Yeah, it would create another one. Yeah,
So
exactly. So what I found with Mint that you shouldn't actually um, put a make some space because it will ignore that space and will try and shrink the Windows partition already. And so I've learned that, well, at least with Mint, and if I want to dual boot, is actually have to just completely nuke and pave any previous Linux install that's on there, extend the Windows partition to include everything, and then get Mint and Mint install manager to then remake that partition, which it seems to do. And Mint being Mint does it well.
yeah,
So
I
the single safest and greatest thing that I've started doing and recommending others do, and I didn't always do this, was I would usually have, and a lot of systems, depending on the operating system, want a larger EFI partition anyway. Like the 100 megabyte isn't big enough. I mean, Windows is okay with that. Some Linux is okay with that, but a lot of them want a 512 or even a 1 gig partition. What I do now is I leave the Windows one alone. So it's its own EFI partition. If it's 100 megs, whatever it created, right, whether it was on the system to start with, I shrink down the main partition and leave, the EFI partition alone. I create a second EFI partition, a boot, just for Linux, so that whenever I'm installing something as a dual boot, it's not going to overwrite the EFI, because the single greatest problem I've had is if I overwrite that EFI, now I have to go back and reset, the Windows bootloader. I have to go get a Windows install disk. I have to boot to it. I have to go through all those stupid, commands to rewrite the bootloader and all of that. So having a second EFI partition that's separating them completely. Windows can have this one. I never touch it. It's the first partition on the disk usually. And then whenever I'm going to create the partition structure for the second boot, whether it's Linux or whatever, then it gets its own EFI partition. It gets a swap partition, because I still prefer partition for swap than a swap file, because I'm old fashioned. Sue me.
you might want to hibernate your machine.
Right. And then I also will have, yeah, exactly. I make it big enough to be able to hibernate.
Yeah.
And then I also will then create, and I don't do like a home partition as a separate one. You can, depends on what you're, how you're setting it up. And then I have, the main sort of root partition. And then I store my data, because when I switch between, because this way you can have multiple boots. My data partition is actually a separate disk. And what I do is in my root partition, in my home folder, I just create links. So I'll have a downloads folder, my documents and music and all that stuff, but those are just links over to a different disk. So the data itself is not stored on that root partition, meaning if I then reinstall a new version of Linux, I'm not installing it over top of the stuff that was already in the home partition, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do something similar to that with ButterFS, where I create subvolumes on a different drive, and then those subvolumes are mounted to documents, videos, pictures, and all that stuff. And that's easily transferred over from one installation to the next. The question I have, though, I've never tried two separate EFI system partitions. Now, when you install Linux on that second EFI, does Grub or systemd boot?
Yeah, it doesn't care.
It doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't care.
Okay. Now that's interesting, because I've
because that stuff is written in the in the BIOS itself, right? So the BIOS, when that entry is added, it's also telling it which partition it's on. It doesn't assume that it's the first partition, or it doesn't assume there's only one EFI partition. It actually will know which partition to go to based on when it's installed and when that entry is added into.
That's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, I've never even considered trying that. I mean, yeah, you heard it here first, folks. No, because Windows does that. It creates like a 100 megabyte, and it can be okay, at least in the beginning, as long as the only thing you're putting in there is the stub files that the bootloader needs to boot up as long as you're not using that as the slash boot, because that's a non-starter from the beginning, because that 100
Right.
megabytes is nowhere near big enough for your init volume and your kernel and all that, but to be able to, and the other problem is there I've heard of cases where Windows will completely nuke or get rid of your
Yep.
EFI files for your Linux install just because it doesn't recognize what it is, and it'll
Mhm.
completely nuke it. Well, if it's on a completely separate partition,
Yep.
perhaps it
Yep.
has no ability to do
The
that.
other and the other nice thing is when the system deboot, so it's not even grub, right? The way it handles EFI, and you can get it to where you can have a menu, you can add it to the system deboot, there's a configuration file. It's not impossible. One of my complaints about Pop OS in the beginning was because they use system deboot, it doesn't work like grub, and then you don't get this nice boot menu through grub. You have to go through your BIOS and switch between the two, right? Which isn't like the greatest hardship in the world, but it's just less convenient because then you have to remember to hit F12 whenever the system's booting up, or else you go, oh man, I forgot. So you can still do that with system deboot. You just have to do it as a separate configuration. It doesn't have like a grub, like a OS prober. There's no like equivalent to OS prober for system D. I mean, there probably is, but not that I've ever seen. So
It just
the
doesn't need
systems
it.
that use system deboot, well, it technically doesn't, and that's the answer I got. Like whenever I remember years ago talking to the Pop OS team and saying like, well, that's really obnoxious and annoying. Actually, no, it might even have been elementary, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure. But the answer I got was, well, just hit F12 when your system's booting and switch between them. It's like, well, yeah, but if I reboot and walk away, it's going to go to the default entry. Whereas if I have a grub configuration, anyway, so having the separate EFI partition also helps with systemd because to me, it makes it easier. And they tend to stomp on each other if you have a single partition. Either it's not going to be the right size, or if you start installing stuff enough. I ran into this with Fedora once with the silver blues and the immutable ones.
Bluefin,
Kino White,
Aurora.
Bluefin.
Bluefin.
Thank you, Aurora. Yes, Bluefin. So I was testing Bluefin, and it would get to this part of the installer when it was trying to write the boot entry in EFI, and it would fail because it already existed. And I'm like, and it wouldn't overwrite it or something. And I'm like, why is it doing this? And so it ended up being that I had to go in and manually remove the EFI partition, the EFI folder under boot, because of like some bug that's been there for literally like 10 years. Like if you go back, dates back to like the beginning of Fedora. It's like 8 years or something. But yeah, it was like some obscure esoteric bug that I guess not enough people run into. But like it drove me crazy for half a day sitting here trying to figure out like, what am I doing wrong? Like I'm blowing out, I'd recreate everything and reinstall. And like, so that was when I decided, okay, I'm going to try a separate EFI partition and see what happens. And yeah, I just sort of figured out like, oh, okay. So just having them be separate stops all of this. Like, cause if you install enough versions of Linux and different operating systems on your computer in the same EFI directory or partition, go in there and look. There is so much cruft and garbage that's left over because when you blow out and reinstall, nothing's going in and cleaning any of that out. It's just lumping on. And then you have my favorite of it's /EFI/boot/EFI/ like you're like 4 or 5 levels down. It's like, what the hell is going on? And yeah, it gets really ugly and messy. And so yeah, if you have the second partition, and even with that second partition, you're safe to overwrite it. So to Bill's point, whenever you're going to go through the installer and overwrites, decide whether you're going to format the partition or leave the partition as it is. If you're reusing the EFI partition, you have to be really careful not to format it, because if you do, there goes your Windows, bootloader. But if you have a second EFI partition that you're using, you can format it, because once you've removed the instance of Linux that was using it, then you're basically starting from scratch anyway. So to keep it clean, you can just say, okay, yeah, now I'm not only going to format my root partition, I'm going to also format this second EFI partition. Again, not the first one, but the second one. And it's a clean way to do it once you start, once you separate it like that.
Here's my question, though, and maybe my brain is skipping over something. Let's say you're dual booting a couple of Linux distributions, and the first one you install uses grub, and the second one uses systemd boot. You start your machine. What do you get?
Well, it depends on which system or which entry in the EFI is set.
Yep, that's what I meant when I said my brain was skipping over something. Okay.
Yeah.
Because that
so
will
if
be
it's
listed.
the one with grub, then you'll get your grub menu, and if it's the one for Windows, it'll just
and either one of them will give you the
menu if there is one. Yeah.
Usable menu of all the operating systems on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there's
provided
like
you have OS Prober
and a grub.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now with systemd boot, and I'm going to go ahead and say, if you're using anything with systemd boot, the Arch Wiki is your friend there, because it's pretty exhaustive. Well, I mean, because
it is.
There's not a lot of there's no like grub customizer.
I use the Arch Wiki for every other day. Man.
Oh yeah. When it comes to systemd boot, systemd boot works with like 2 or 3 really simple config files. You've got one that tells it the defaults for like how long to wait before booting the default, which one is the default, and then you've like one directory level deeper is where you've got these configuration files, which each one represents the boot, whatever it is, either your default boot option or the one with the fallback, meaning without any out of tree kernel modules or whatever like that, and then also within that directory you'll have a boot entry for your Windows installation, which if you're using a distribution that uses systemd boot by default, it should create one of those automatically. But again, the Arch Wiki tells how to create all of those files if you run into a problem where you get systemd boot up and running, you've got a Windows installation but it's not showing up. It's as simple as just going in and creating this 1 or 2 line config file. And I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah, it's super easy.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm looking in my notes right now because I thought I had it. But yeah, systemd boot's actually not too bad to deal with. It's not doing it for you like we've come to get used to from a lot of distros where they have OS Prober, and it just sort of recognizes it and gives you a nice, pretty grub, boot screen and all that stuff. Yeah, systemd boot is pretty rudimentary by comparison, and
but I think that makes it cleaner and more performant.
It does, but you have to know how to do that extra step if you care enough to do it. But again, it's someone who's dual booting is probably already willing to do that extra work anyway.
You know what? That sounds like a cool video to make, actually, Eric. Your second EFI partition.
I've never heard of anybody doing that. I mean, I've seen dual boot videos and creating the second EFI. I've not seen that.
Maybe that would be my my return to YouTube. I haven't made a video. I still have I think like 3,000 or 4,000 subscribers.
Wow.
And I made videos for like a lot of videos for a while, and I just sort of it's down under 3,000. I'm at 2,600. But and my most popular videos are all the ones like that where I was fixing a problem. Like my single most popular video, 89,000 views, is fix Arch Linux boot issues. So there you go.
Yeah. Good luck with that one.
Oh, and you'll like this, Bill. Audacity, simple fix for Audacity killing headphone audio. There was this thing, and it must still happen to some people, where if you have the wrong source selected in Audacity, and sometimes I guess the default is the problem.
Yep.
But if if you start it, it will kill your audio so that it won't come out, so it won't play through any channel at that point. And then you have to go through and do this like reset. You have to do like an ELSA reset, I think is what the command is, and then it'll work again. And so yeah, it's like a 4-minute video that I've gotten so many positive comments.
I've just
anyway,
deleted
I haven't
config folder for Audacity and then restart it, and then it seems to fix the problem. But then I've got to go through and redo all the settings on my plugins, you know. So that's been my fix, because you open up the inputs and whatever for Audacity, and you get this list of.
Why do all roads lead to Audacity, man?
Well, it's funny you bring that up because there was an update.
We should get blooming sponsored by Audacity. The amount of free press.
I'm not sure how much sponsorship we'd get after the shit that I've said about them on this.
Well, show. Yeah, I know, but I mean, all publicity is good publicity, right?
Yeah, I suppose it is, and I you know, they take a lot of crap. If you ever go to the Reddit channel or page or whatever Reddit calls their shit, and see the Audacity page, they take a lot of shit from people, and they're calm about it, and they're professional. I gotta hand it to them. There's a Facebook page, and they take a lot of shit on there. You know, it is what it is. That's I mean, on the bright side, it's a piece of software people love, and they want it to be good. It's as we say, you know, one of those darling open source projects, you know, that's up there with OBS Studio and Thunderbird and Firefox and all that. You know, it's one of our tree toppers, you know. Mm-hmm. So we want it to be good. I'm just not to the point where I'm willing to make videos talking about it. Because it would get my blood pressure up, no doubt. But there's been an update. I noticed right before the show, I ran the Flatpak updates, and 3.7 is out, and I am scared because 3.6 finally worked, and now we have 3.7.
Isn't the Flatpak 3.7? I'm sure that is.
That's what I just. Yeah, that's what I said. You know, it's up to 3.7, but I haven't started it yet. I just saw it on on the updates. Okay. Because I've got Mint set up to show me the Flatpak updates instead of updating them.
Right, okay. Yeah, it's 3.7.1. Yeah, it's just come. Yeah.
Yeah. So
new effects. It says. Yeah. I'm wondering
yay.
Yay, because that's what we need, isn't it?
And you know, the Flatpak of Audacity is just, I mean, copious plugins on that. I mean, whoever's doing the Flatpak is just filling it with everything they can find, and it still doesn't have the one that I like. So I have to go get it for myself from GitHub.
Is it sorry, did you say it was the most up-to-date version on Flatpak?
The Flatpak is 3.7.1.
I mean,
so whatever it is.
Okay.
So
which one do I have? Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure which one I have installed.
If you open up your plugins and you got a list that drops down past the bottom of your screen, then yeah, you got the Flatpak version. The app image, which is the one that...
Yeah, I have Audacity. Okay. Or I have Flatpak.
Yeah.
They also...
So anyway, one piece of good news. So Elementary did install.
Oh, we're doing this in real time. Cool.
Well, I just had it on running before we started, didn't it? And so, you know, it's kind of, you know, to the side somewhere. So I was just, so it's done it. Oh, that's good.
So
I'll tell you next time how whether it's any good or not.
Well, I was just gonna say, for anybody that's really interested, which nobody in the live stream,
okay.
If there was, I would say keep listening on Roundtable, and maybe we'll be further along.
Yeah, maybe.
So, yeah, D-Wiz had separate EFI partition. You have been educated, folks. I got to try that.
Yes.
The interesting thing about creating a video about that, though, is it's setting up, because to record a video going through a dual boot means that you have to make a virtual machine.
Yeah, I was going to say you'd have to do it in a VM, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's got to be
that's the easiest way.
Dual booting virtual machine, and I had never done that before. I didn't even in theory, it seemed possible, but I'd never tried it before because.
Listen, if you're testing this, I've done that. just go in when you're setting it up and just choose EFI as the.
Yeah.
You have to select it if you're using like VirtualBox. But that's the best way to test it. Yeah, is to just have it. And I know for a fact, like I'm looking at my XPS, which doesn't have Windows on it anymore, but my Latitude does. And if I fired it up, I know I have multiple EFI partitions because that was the system I figured it out on. But yeah, and I would say though, if you want to test it out, do it on a virtual machine. Install Windows if you want. And if you want to go that far, you can, because you can download and install Windows for free. It'll take you 3 years to do, but you can do it. And then
He's not.
Yeah,
But if you just want to test it,
when I did it last week, I said it was a lot better than previously installing Windows. I had to block out a whole day.
Ever.
Yeah, but
I mean, comparatively, yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, like just sat here. I've just done a Linux install. Just sat here while we're talking.
Right.
Well,
I know.
yeah, that would so
You would
it's a
just
little
now
bit
be at the
better.
window where it's trying to sell you Xbox Live and
Yeah,
Office
yeah.
365 and I don't know
But,
what else.
but as I said, it's better, but it's still 3 hours, I'd say.
Yeah,
minimum.
it's bad. And then you got to wait another day and a half before you get all the updates and actually get an updated installation. It's you got to really want it. I mean, Windows is for people that you do. You got to really want Windows. But
I mean,
like Eric said, it won't cost you anything. You can download the ISO and run it, and the only thing it keeps you from doing is
you can't personalize it, right? Isn't it something
you can't change the.
You've got the choice between a dark mode and a light mode. You can't change the background, like all the things nobody gives a flying shit about. Yeah,
it doesn't make a difference on Windows anyway. It's not like you're personalizing anything.
No. I suppose there might have been a time when I cared about that back in XP days when I was
I love the way
decorating
you
my
said
AOL.
that. There's been a time when I might have cared about it. There's a lot of layers of abstraction in that
Way too bad. I
Think back to whenever having that watermark on your desktop might have mattered to you. Right?
I don't even think that's there anymore.
I
I don't even think they do that anymore. It
No?
just,
No, they do.
Oh,
They
okay.
do.
No,
They do. They do. They do. But having said that, if you have a device which at one point did run Windows, as Joe once mentioned, the key is often in the BIOS somewhere.
Yep.
And so I've taken Windows 11 Recovery Assistant, whatever it is, the thing on Microsoft's website, downloaded it, plugged it in, and yes, as I said, it's taken 3-4 hours, but it's booted it up and it's never asked for a key.
No, it won't.
And then when you look, it's already got a key, and you're like, I never put this key in.
So that depends on what type of machine you buy. If you buy a first party like a Dell, HP, then yes, it will be in your BIOS, and it should be automatically. But if you do like a home built, like you get your own motherboard and that kind of stuff, you have to then buy that. That's the separation, because every time I home build a system, it wants a key, and that's been my decision point of like Bill says, do I care? And anytime I've had to run Windows on one of my own built desktops, I'm like, nope,
no,
I don't care.
because it doesn't get in the way. You don't miss out on any updates. It doesn't restrict you in any meaningful way whatsoever. So,
no functional way. Yeah.
So obviously they don't care anymore. I mean, like in the Windows 7 days or the Windows XP days, you might have. Well, I don't even think it would let you install. I think you can still get a copy of 8. From Microsoft, but I think that's when they.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can download it, but if you don't have the key, then it just outright doesn't let you install 10 and 11.
Oh, okay. So I figured out one thing now that Elementary won't support. It won't support the touchscreen. I mean, it does kind of.
It's very it's very, very poor. I agree with you. I put it on my Latitude 2-in-1. And it didn't last because touchscreen is not first class, like thought out. You know what I mean? Like so
so you can kind of breaking news, folks. You can kind of select stuff, but okay. This might change things.
Yep.
Get it up to
it
date.
definitely does not. If you have a touch device and you care at all about touch interactions, screen touch interactions, touchpad is fine. But if
Yeah.
if you're doing like a tablet or if you care about the interactions on your screen, like gestures and stuff, no, there's nothing in there for that.
Mm.
I found Plasma to be
All
about the
roads
best.
lead to Ubuntu, don't they? However much I bloody much try, I
Or
always
Plasma's
end
Arch.
not
up
bad
in
except
Ubuntu or Mint.
Plasma's not bad except their on-screen keyboard is garbage. So GNOME for me is the only one I can use on a touch screen because it's the only one where it will give you the keyboard when you need it, and it's the only one where the keyboard actually is clean and works well. It's not a. It is such a basic keyboard. I mean, I know I'm spoiled, but it's nothing like a. It doesn't have. I don't think it has any kind of autocomplete. It doesn't have like any correction. It doesn't have any kind of like
But
double.
that's fair enough. You don't really need that, to be fair.
But
You
if
know.
you're using it like a touchscreen, if you're trying to touch
He's
type,
talking
yeah.
about like a
Yeah.
tablet kind of form
Yeah,
factor.
yeah, I know,
Yeah,
no, I
kind
know
of.
what you mean. I know what you mean. I suppose, no, I understand. Yes, I suppose it could get it. Yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah,
I mean,
fair
that's
point.
what I'm saying is like when I've tried to use KD like a Plasma or any other desktop environment really besides GNOME, there just doesn't because GNOME's the only one that has really thought about, ground up like what is the touch experience like if I'm using a tablet, and like it is pretty good because it's got, especially with Wayland, because it's got all of the gesture support. It's got a
Mm,
good on-screen keyboard. It's got, all of the things are spread out enough and large enough that it's easy to sort of get to things. Because Plasma is so fiddly, like everything is so close together, and like when you're trying to with a pen, it's not terrible. So I do have a pen for the Latitude, and you can use Plasma like that. Um, and you know what? And I'll say this just because I think it's fair to say Windows 11, their on-screen keyboard is incredible, and also you can even hand write in
yeah,
like an entry field, and it will translate it into text. Like,
yeah. No, I mean,
so
that is very good. I must say.
yeah, for what it's worth.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie about that.
Yeah. So there have been days when I've had to use that thing in tablet mode, and I've been happy that I still had Windows on it because I was able to really get stuff done
Yeah,
versus like,
yeah. So I remember that, but we were buying a house. This was some years ago. And a lot of these PDF documents kind of came to me, and instead of printing them out, I was able to open them up in Edge, and with the pen that I had, I was able to sign all of these things electronically, fill out any forms quickly like that, and
mhm.
send it on. And okay, I know I wasn't the most common scenario to have come into, but that's when I really thought to myself, and this was a good couple of years ago. I said we bought this house when 2019, so I'm talking about a good while ago. And it was good then, and it's only improved since.
Mhm.
So, oh God, here we go. As I said, all roads lead to Ubuntu. How much I try. By the way,
Well,
Well,
how did you find Bluefin? You said you'd use Bluefin.
yeah, I like Bluefin. They're just not there yet. I mean, all of those, yeah, all of the immutable or composable, whatever, and now acronym they're using, not acronym, adjective they're using. Um, they show extremely great promise. Like really believe within like 5 years, maybe. I mean, I know that's a hard thing to predict with Linux, but there's a lot of smart people putting a lot of effort behind, not only on the the software side, but on the hardware side, thinking about like how do we deploy operating systems. And if you look at, this is the proof that it works. Smart devices have an A/B system usually for sort of that immutable core, and then a virtualization layer on top of it. So it works pretty well right now, but it's a fight. And until it's not a fight where I feel like I have to like take extraordinary measures to get things to work the way that I want them to, it's just not going to be my day-to-day system. But I really enjoyed using it because it actually the thought that they put into what they included, like the programs that are pre-installed, and then the mechanisms that they give you to administer the system and add things, and And I already use a lot of flat packs anyway, and there's a huge reliance on flat packs for virtualization of applications. So, I mean, the thinking underneath of it is very, very solid. It's just the tool sets themselves, and then sort of the execution isn't quite there yet. But it's
So,
not going to take them long.
so, so practically, can you give me an example of, one of these situations where you had to fight with the machine?
So
I'm
Gwake, I use a
just
Gwake
wondering.
drop down terminal. Yeah, so real easy one. I use Gwake, the drop down terminal. You hit F12 and it just does a little drop down. I've always used it forever and
Me
ever,
too.
and it's just the way I use a terminal. Of course, that's like a whiny thing. Like I could certainly you just use a different terminal, but I like Gwake. Well, if their prescribed method for installing software that isn't a Flatpak is to use DistroBox. And I can spool up DistroBox and I can run Quake. The problem is it's running inside of the Podman or the Docker container that has the distro running, and so the Wake system is looking at that distro, not the one that I'm on.
Yeah.
So that doesn't. And another one is a launcher. So if you use like a U launcher or something like that, same deal. It only sees the programs that are installed or the apps that are installed on that virtualized operating system, not the host one that it's running on. So there's some basics. Now, the way around that is you can then install it, you can layer it on top as a native package, which it works and you can do, but it's also a pain in the ass because it's just this extra step, and they don't want you to do it that way, so they make it's more difficult to do. And so again, I think DistroBox is going to get better. The way that those things are installed and function is going to get better. And like those are very sort of last mile challenges. They've already got the core of it very solid. So
it sounds like if you live in Flatpak apps, you could get on and it wouldn't. If you
just use a browser that's a Flatpak browser, or even though if you did just do that overlay, right? There's maybe the few packages that you need to have as core, that are part of the image. Let's say if the developers haven't done it and you're deploying a system for a family member or something, or even for yourself, like if there's just sort of this core set, the problem then is every time you do an AB update, it has to download the developed image, like the released image, and then it has to do this layering thing on top of it again. So it's just more complicated than it needs to be, but I don't think it's always going to be that way. There's already sort of this GitHub build process where you can go and have your own sort of build script where you're including the extra packages that aren't part of the core image. And then each time there's a new image released, it will build your customized version of it. And then whenever you go to update, you download that copy of it. So there are mechanisms to do, but right now that takes an extraordinary amount of effort for like a regular person. Like nobody's going to do that. So until they make it such that just the random person can download it. And like I said, I mean, they are pretty damn close already, but so
it's not there yet.
But I'm looking forward to that because it's going to make it so easy to run updates and to have the stability of that core system, where it's rock solid. And then you're just sort of like you said, if you use Flatpaks, that are just like Office applications or like a PDF reader, or just like the stuff that a normal person would use or need. And FlatHub just keeps getting bigger and bigger every day. Like more and more stuff is going on there, and more first party developer stuff is coming on there. So, and there'll be more support for it and more demand for it. And so it will just keep getting bigger and grow more. And I think not only will the technology increase and be more polished, but the ecosystem itself will get better. And I can envision pretty soon we will have really very strong options, and to the point where I'll probably be happy using them. So,
wow.
Well,
okay,
that puts us over an hour, kids. Good show, huh?
Yeah.
Let us know what you think, folks. Let us know what you think about this dual booting nonsense. Do you still do it? You want Eric
And
to make a
has
video?
anybody else done this? Yeah, has anybody else done the second DFI thing?
Yeah, I'd
Sounds
like to know what people think of that.
an elegant solution from an elegant man.
And we need an upvote or a downvote on a video from Eric. That'd be fun to watch, I think.
Brother.
Anyway, yeah, let us know. Show at linuxotc.org. Comment directly on the website. We're on Mastodon and Discord. I think that's about it. Anyway, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, I've been Bill.
I've been Eric.
And I'm not doing it.
And Majid's
Good for you. Good for you.
Majid
Take a
is
stand.
not doing it again. See you, folks.